Well, Connexus, I'm here with Gary Chapman. Many of you know him. The books he's written, Five Love Languages of Apology. He's written a book called Screen Kids. He's written a book on loving your spouse when you feel like walking away. He's written one on anger. Love Languages of Apology, I think, is kind of pretty apropos for this conflict series that we're in called Triggered. And really looking forward to a conversation with him today. So welcome. Really good to see you, Dr. Chapman.
Well, thank you. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, if you, we were just having a conversation. I said, if you hear my sump pump running or a chainsaw outside, those of us in Central Ontario know we're in the midst of an ice storm, and my neighbor's taking the tree off his house. So it's a little bit of a different kind of background today on the podcast. I know that you've helped all kinds of people. I mean, the love languages work you've done has permeated so much, I would argue, of North American culture. People who aren't church people know all about the five love languages. And, but when it comes to criticism, that's what we're talking about, criticism and conflict. When it comes to criticism, why do you think it's so hard for people to handle criticism and conflict?
Well, I think all of us like to think that we're pretty good people. And when someone criticizes us for something, it's pretty natural, I think, to have a defensive response because you feel like they're shooting at you. You know, they're saying something critical about you. Uh, so I've never had any trouble understanding, why people get defensive. But I do know that when we get defensive, then we're not going to learn anything from the
Mm,
criticism. And I
hmm
think we should learn something from all criticism, even if it's not positive criticism. Keep your ears open to try to see, well, what can I learn from this.
When somebody receives criticism, do you think, or I mean, obviously, when they deal with conflict, I think they're coming at it often from their five love languages, or they receive criticism, maybe they see it that same way. Is there a correlation, do you think, between how we hear conflict and criticism and kind of what our primary love language is?
Well, I think a person who has words of affirmation as their primary love language, critical words spoken in anger and harshness is like a dagger in their heart. I think those words hurt anyone, but they hurt the person whose love language is words of affirmation even more deeply than they would hurt
Mm.
other people. So in that sense, I think there is a correlation between, how we respond to criticism. There are people who are just very hard and harsh, and words don't mean a lot to them. They have the idea, oh, words are empty, and consequently they don't hurt as much when they hear critical words as the person for whom words is their primary love language.
Now, when it comes to when it comes to relationships where you have a spouse who words of affirmation is their love language, and you have something challenging that you need to communicate, what are kind of some of the things you could be thinking about? How do you approach that situation?
Well, I think first of all, you need to ask for permission. Honey, if something were really bothering me, would this be a good time to share it with you?
Hmm.
And even if they say, no, honey, this is not a good time, I can almost guarantee you they'll come back in less than an hour and
Hmm.
they'll say about that thing that was bothering you. I think I'm okay. I think I'm ready now. You see, but you help them get ready. If you just hit them broadside without any warning, you just rattle off something that's bothering you, and then they're likely going to bark back at you. But if you ask permission, they're far more likely, then, even if not immediately, they're far more likely to come back and receive it. And then I would say this: before you share the criticism, I like to think in terms of positive criticism. That is something you think will make them a better person. Before you share that, you say, "Well, wait a minute, honey. I want to tell you first of all, I really appreciate the fact that you da 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 da. And when you get the bugs off my windshield, I mean, it's wonderful. You tell them three things that you like about them before you tell them the thing that you would like to see them change. And
Mm.
again, because you have affirmed them, and now you're affirming that there's wonderful things about them. But here's one thing that I really think it would make life better for me if you could not do this, or if you could do this. And again, they're far more likely to receive it, because now they're not saying in their mind, well, I do this and this and this, and now they bring up this.
Right.
I just can't please them. But if you tell them the things that do please you first, and then share the one thing, and I say one thing, don't ever share 2 or 3 things at once, because
Mm.
that's overwhelming. Just share one thing that you would like to see them change. And chances are they will say, well, honey, I'll give some thought to that, and I'll try to do that. So
Mm.
it doesn't mean that they will change everything in a marriage just to please you. I remember my wife and I had a conflict over the way you load a dishwasher.
Mm.
I'm an organized person. I believe everything ought to be in its place. And so I would, but my wife loads the dishwasher like she's playing frisbee. She just throws them in there. And I didn't know anything in those days about how to solve those things. So I have to explain to her, honey, these 2 spoons with peanut butter between them, they're not going to get clean. And we about every 3 days we're losing a glass, because I was unloading the dishwasher. I was the morning person unloading the dishwasher.
Right.
But and her response was, Gary, I don't have time to organize the dishwasher when I'm cooking. I'm sorry, Well, I worked on that a while, but one day she said to me, honey, if that is so important to you, why don't you load the dishwasher? And I thought,
Right.
well, I could do that. That had not crossed my mind.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But I said, honey, there's some nights I have to go back to the church after dinner, so I couldn't do it on those nights. And she said, well, I don't mind doing it. And I'm thinking, I know you don't, but in the morning I've got to unload it.
Right. Right.
But that was our solution, So what I'm saying here is, in a marriage, there's always going to be some things that your spouse will never change to your satisfaction. So love accepts many imperfections.
Mm.
And so I think we just have to recognize that. There's some people that will never know how to keep up with their car keys. And I don't care how many times you put hooks out up there in the garage and say, honey, hang them on the hook and they'll be there. They're not going to do that.
Right.
I don't know if it is they cannot do it or they will not do it. I've often thought maybe it's genetic. Maybe there's a drawer closing gene or a washing machine gene she didn't get. Yeah. But love doesn't demand perfection, because none of us are going to be perfect and do everything that our spouse thinks we ought to be doing.
Now, I've got a spouse whose love language is verbal affirmation. So this is like free advice for me today. So, what about when my wife says something to me where she needs to challenge me in something because her love language is words of affirmation? Does that mean that it's harder for her to be critical of me as a result of that? Like I need to kind of read between the lines more. How does that work?
Yeah, I think that is a possibility, because a person who has the words of affirmation as their primary love language, they tend to give words of affirmation to other people. It's because they know they know how it makes them feel, and they assume it makes other people feel the same way. So they tend to give words of affirmation. So yes, I think it's more difficult for them, perhaps, to bring up something that's bothering them. That's why I say to a couple, why don't you have a plan? Because most people do not have a plan for sharing those things.
Mm.
I said, what about every other week, or maybe every 2 weeks? You just both agree that on Thursday night, we're going to take 15 minutes. And this week, you can share with me one thing that you would like to see me change, that you think would make things easier for you. And then the next week, I'll share one with you, or the next 2 weeks, I'll share one with you. And again, you preface them by telling them the 3 things you like about them, and then you share. But now you've got a plan for handling these things, and they don't get built up inside. Most couples have no plan, so the things that irritate them just builds up pressure inside, and then one night they explode, and they tell them 5 things that they wish they would change, and they're not going to change anything, So,
right.
Well,
I wish I could say I've never been there.
But if you have a plan, you're far more likely to be able to give criticism and receive criticism. in a positive way, because both of you know we're human. We see things differently. We're going to disagree on some things. So let's just have a plan and a place and a time that we share these with each other. And we're making requests. If you could change this, it would be really, really meaningful to me. And most things we can change. So why not? But if there are things that they don't change, we do come to accept those things.
That's great. Now, when we talk about conflict, let's just talk about conflict reparation. So you've had a conflict in it. Let's use a marriage as a good example. So you have a conflict. Talk to me a little bit, maybe walk us through the love languages for the 20% of people that maybe don't know what they are. And then talk to me about how those love languages play a role in the resolution of the conflict as far as apology or repairing what's happened.
Yeah. Well, the 5 languages of love, and they're no particular order, but one is words of affirmation, the one we've been talking about. And then there's acts of service, doing something for the other person. In a marriage, that's washing dishes, vacuuming floors, walking the dog, mowing the grass. The old saying is, actions speak louder than words. If this is their love language, that is true. Actions will speak louder than words. And then there's gifts. It's universal to give gifts as an expression of love. The gift says, they were thinking about me. Look what they got from me. And then there's quality time, giving the person your undivided attention. I do not mean sitting there watching television together. Someone else has your attention.
Right.
TV is off, computer is down, we're not answering our phone. We're giving each other our full attention to sharing life together, processing life together. Or we can be taking a walk down the road together or going out to eat together, assuming that we talk. We've all seen couples in the restaurant across from each other. They each have their phone out answering text messages. That's not quality time. So you give them your undivided attention. And then number 5 is physical touch. And again, we've long known the power, emotional power of physical touch. That's why we pick up babies and hold them and kiss them and cuddle them. Long before the baby understands the meaning of the word love, the baby feels love by physical touch. So the basic concept is that each of us has what I call a primary love language. One of these 5 speaks more deeply to us emotionally than the other 4. And if you don't speak the person's primary language, they will not feel loved, even though you're speaking love in some other language.
So when it comes to, okay, my wife and I have had a conflict and I know what her love language is, what is the best way to approach that? What is the best way to apologize? How do you approach that situation?
Well, I think when we have a conflict, and we will all have conflicts, I say to couples, listen, conflict is a part of life. 2 humans, husbands and wives, will never, ever think the same way, have the same emotions, because we come from different backgrounds. We have different ideas and different thoughts. Just accept that as a reality. That is going to be true. So if you understand that, then when you have a conflict, you're far more likely to listen to the other person. Conflicts cannot be resolved by arguing. I've often said, if you win an argument with your spouse, that is, they say, okay, have it your way. You won the argument. They lost. It's no fun to live with a loser. Why would you create a loser? We are on the same team. We're not competitors. So if your spouse is concerned and upset about something, even if they're raising their voice, listen to what they're saying. Put yourself in their shoes and try to look at it through their eyes as to why they would be upset and why they're so concerned about this. Try to see their perspective. Don't sit there and reload your guns. Boy, they're wrong on that first point. Can't wait till they get through. I'll shoot that one down. We're not in a fight. We're not going to shoot each other. We're trying to understand each other. But if you do lose it, and if you do yell at the other person in response, or maybe you're the one that's yelling at them, sharing this thing that bugs you, it's not helpful and it's wrong. It's not kind to be yelling at each other. A soft answer turns away wrath, the Bible says.
Right.
And so to come back and say to that person, honey, I'm sorry I lost my temper. I yelled at you. And I know that's not right and that's not kind. and I'm sorry for that. And I
Mm.
hope you can forgive me. And they genuinely apologize to you. We can talk more about what a genuine apology looks like. But if they genuinely apologize to you, then you have a choice to make. You can forgive them or not forgive them. But the biblical concept is you will forgive them. You choose to
Right.
forgive them because you have been forgiven by God. And
Mm.
forgiveness is not a feeling. Forgiveness is a choice. You know, there's 3 Hebrew words in the Old Testament, 4 Greek words in the New Testament, translated forgive or forgiveness. But the 2 central ideas are to pardon them. I'm not going to make you pay for this. I'm not going to hit you over the head with this. I'm going to pardon you. The other is to take away, to remove the barrier that this created between us. And I'm choosing to remove the barrier so that our relationship can go forward.
Mm.
That is forgiveness. It's not a feeling. And even when you forgive them, it doesn't remove the memory. You know, I've heard people say, if you haven't forgotten, you haven't forgiven. That's not true.
Mm.
Everything that's ever happened to us, good or bad, is stored in the human brain. And
Right.
sometimes it jumps back. Even 3 years later, it jumps back.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when it does, when the memory comes back, the emotions come back. And we may feel hurt again, And what do you do with that? If you've chosen to forgive them, you say to God, Lord, you know what I'm feeling today. You know what I'm remembering today. But I thank you that I forgave that. Now help me to do something good today. Don't allow the memory and the emotions to control your behavior. Because if you do, you will probably sin against them by being unkind. And
Mm-hmm.
now you've got to apologize for something. So, and I've heard people say, well, I just don't feel like forgiving. I understand that. When you've been hurt deeply, you don't feel like forgiving. But it's not a feeling we're looking for. It's a choice that we make to pardon them and to remove the barrier so we can now work on growing in our marriage relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting how there's so many definitions for people of what forgiveness is and what apology is. Well, I'll forgive them when they deserve it. That's something you hear. Well, when they've done enough penance, then I'll deserve that. Then I'll forgive them. And apologies, I gave them apology. I said to them, I'm sorry they felt that way. Rather than, how genuine is an apology like that? So just talk to me about I'm sitting down with my wife. I need to apologize. What does a real apology look like?
Well, what we discovered is that not only do people have a love language, they have an apology language.
Mm.
That is, they have an idea in their mind of what a sincere apology looks like. And most of us learned how to apologize from our parents.
Mm.
Little Johnny's 4 years old. He pushes his sister, and his mother says, Johnny, you don't do that to sister. Go tell her you're sorry. So
Mm.
little Johnny says, I'm sorry, even if he's not. I'm sorry.
Right, right,
He's
right,
23 now. If
right.
he offends his wife, he's going to say, I'm sorry. That's all he's ever been taught. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
But she had different parents, and they taught her a different way to apologize. And she's waiting for you to express your apology in her language. And
Mm-hmm.
so what we did, we asked thousands of people 2 questions. When you apologize, what do you typically say or do? Second question, when someone's apologizing to you, what do you want to hear them say or do? And their answers fell into 5 categories. I
Mm-hmm.
promise you, we weren't looking for 5, even though I like
Right,
5.
right.
And we later call them the 5 apology languages.
Yeah.
And they are, the first one is expressing regret, often with the words, I'm sorry. But what we're
Mm-hmm.
trying to communicate is, I regret that I did that. I feel badly about what I did. That's what we're trying to communicate when we say, I'm sorry. And then, not only that, but it's accepting responsibility. I was wrong. I should not have done that. Now, I've had men say, well, Dr. Chapman, how can I say I was wrong if I don't think I was wrong?
Mm-hmm.
I say, listen, don't get bent out of shape over whether or not what you did was morally wrong. If it hurt them, then in that sense, it's wrong. And you need to accept responsibility. And I give this example. I had come home after a couple of days speaking somewhere, and they had delivered a chair that had been reupholstered. And my wife said to me, honey, how do you like the new cover? And without thinking, I said to her, well, honey, I like it, but to be honest, I like the old cover better. She broke into tears. I can't believe you don't like it. I spent 2 months going all over town trying to find the right material, and now you don't like it. Now, what I say is this: what I said was not a sin. It was just stupid.
Right.
I did not think before I spoke.
Right.
So, but accepting responsibility, I was wrong, and then offering to make restitution. What can I do to make this right? And for some people, this is what they're waiting to hear.
Mm-hmm.
What can I do to make this right? And if you say, okay, honey, what can I do to make this right? They will have an idea, because in their mind, this is what it means to apologize.
Right.
And then there is genuinely repenting, by which I mean you express the desire to change your behavior. I don't want to do that again. I sometimes give the illustration of a husband and wife. Say, what was the illustration I was thinking about? He told his wife, he said, I'll take care of the baby for a while you do whatever it was she was doing. So the baby, which was about 18 months old, the baby started crying and just screaming. And no matter what he did, the baby kept crying. He lost his temper, picked up the baby and started shaking the baby.
Oh,
and she
no.
saw it and ran in there and grabbed the baby and said, don't do that to our baby. Ran to the bedroom, just sobbing. And in 10 or 15 minutes, he knocked on the door and asked her if he could come in. And he walked in, started crying, and said, honey, I can't believe I did that. You know I love our baby. I don't ever want to do that again. Can you help me? Can we talk? Can we get a plan so I will never, ever do that again? She said, Gary, I sensed he was so sincere that I forgave him, even though what he did was horrible. We sat there and talked and came up with a simple plan that if he ever felt himself about to lose his temper with one of our children, he would say to me, honey, I'm hot. I got to take a walk. And I would know what that meant. I'd take over. He'd take his walk and cool off. Then he would come back and say, okay, honey, I think I'm under control. What could I do to plug in? And he'd plug back into the evening. She said, Gary, that was 8 years ago. He's never lost his temper with one of our children since. He's taken quite a few walks, but he's never lost his temper, you know?
Yeah.
And so for some people, if you don't express the desire to change your behavior, I had a lady say to me just recently, she said, Gary, every time he does it, he says, honey, I'm sorry, I hurt you. Honey, I'm sorry, I hurt you. She said, that means nothing to me. He just keeps on doing it. Every week he does the same old thing. He says, I'm sorry, I hurt you.
Mm-hmm.
So he wasn't repenting. He wasn't just changing his behavior.
Right.
And the number 5 is actually requesting forgiveness. Will you forgive me? Or I hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me. I have to be honest, that one had not crossed my mind, because I thought if I'm apologizing in any manner, would you not know that I want to be forgiven?
Right.
But for some people, they're waiting for you to actually request forgiveness. So those are the 5 apology languages. And as I said, I encourage husbands and wives to discuss this matter and say, you know, what do you consider, honey, to be a sincere apology? And they have an idea. They'll tell you. Now you know what's really meaningful to them. And you can use any of them. All of them are fine. But you want to be sure you include the one that's most meaningful to them if you want to convey to them your sincerity.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting as you talk about it. It brings me back to something you said earlier. It's the importance of reminding yourself that you're on the same team, that you're not on 2 different teams. And that's what those conversations feel like. They feel like, hey, we're on the same team. Let's work together on this. What are some of the, what would you say is a myth that you see couples believing about conflict that they think is true, but actually when you look at it, you think it doesn't actually work that way?
Well, I think that in the first place, there are many couples who enter marriage with no idea that they're going to have conflicts. Because when you're in love, you seldom have conflicts. You know, you got those high euphoric feelings and they're just wonderful. Everything they do is wonderful.
Right.
And then they're shocked when 3 months into the marriage, or sometimes even sooner than that, they realize that they disagree on stuff. and they're kind of shocked. And that's why I say that when I'm speaking on college campuses, I say to them, the time to prepare for marriage is not after you get engaged.
Mm-hmm.
The time to prepare for marriage is now.
Right.
Learn what you can now about marriage. I wrote a book some time ago called Things I Wish I'd Known Before We Got Married. 12 things I know now I wish I'd known then. I said,
Right.
learn these things now. One of them is that we will have conflicts. And so learn how to solve conflicts in a positive way rather than what you would normally do, trying to convince them that they're wrong and you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And so learning some of those skills before you get married and anticipating the reality that you're going to have conflicts is a big part of learning how to solve conflicts in a positive way.
Mm-hmm. And when it comes to relationships that are kind of in conflict, let's say you're in a relationship that's in conflict on a regular basis. Yeah. I think for some couples, they struggle to know the line of like, hey, we need outside help here, or we're not, this is more destructive than it is constructive. Like what should a couple be looking for pattern wise to realize, hey, we're not going to be able to figure this out ourselves? What does that look like when you go, hey, this has actually crossed the line to the point it's too destructive and we've got to figure out a different kind of plan?
Yeah. I think when you're in that kind of marriage, and let's face it, many couples do get to that stage in their marriage. Mm-hmm. Either one of them can take initiative to say, you know, honey, I don't know how you feel about us, but I can't believe that you would be happy with the way we respond to each other and the way we're treating each other. And I've talked to a lot of, and she's saying to him or he's saying to her, I've talked to a lot of other people who have gone for counseling and they have found help in situations like ours. So would you be open and willing to go for counseling with me? And let's try to get someone to help us learn how to treat each other with respect and with dignity and stop putting each other down and hurting each other over and over again. Would you be open to that, honey? And I would say, before you do that, call a pastor or somebody else in your community who can tell you a good Christian counselor. It may be a pastor, or it may be a counselor, so that you already have in mind someone that you would call if they agree to do that. And if they say, no, I'm not going for counseling, that's crazy, I'm not going to do that, then you say, you don't say anything right then, you just drop it. But the next week you say, honey, I know that I asked you last week about counseling, and I know that you said you were not going with me. So I just want you to know, I want to be open with you. I am going for counseling because I have got to have help. I do not want to go on doing what we're doing to each other, just shooting each other every week and hurting each other and living with a lot of hurt. I am going for counseling. So I'm going to make an appointment. If you change your mind and you want to go with me, I'll let you know, when it is, and you can go with me. But I'm going whether you go or not. And they go for counseling. And they will get help because a counselor or a pastor can help them with some initial steps they can take that may help. One of those steps, for example, that I recommend, if I'm speaking only with one person and the other one will not come,
right?
I say, what if you do this? You know what Jesus said about getting the speck out of your own eye before you try to get the plank out of somebody else's eye? What if you sit down alone with God and just say, Lord, you know my marriage and you know my spouse, but what I want to know is, where am I failing in this marriage? What am I doing wrongly in this marriage? And God will answer that prayer. You ask him, he'll show you. He won't give you all of your failures on the same night. That would kill you. But he'll give you 3 or 4 or 5 things, that that it's not kind, it's not tenderhearted, it's not loving, and you just have to, and then confess those things to God. Then go to your spouse and say, I've been thinking a lot about us. In fact, the other day, I actually sat down and asked God to show me where I'm failing you. And he gave me a pretty good list. And I've asked God to forgive me. And if you're open, I'd like to share these things with you and ask if you can find it in your heart that you would forgive me for these things. Wow.
Yeah.
Now you share that, and the person says, well, do you think if I do that, they'll come back in 3 weeks and confess their sins? I said, I don't know. But I'll tell you this. And I don't even know if they'll forgive you, because again, forgiveness is a choice. But I can tell you this, if you take that approach, they're going to walk away. I don't care how they respond. They're going to walk away and they're going to think, man, that's different. All I've heard for 2 years is how bad I am.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're confessing some things that are wrong with them. Whoa, something's happening here.
Mm.
God can use your behavior when you're following the thing that was taught in the Bible. He can use your behavior to touch their heart and soften their heart. And maybe then they will come back. I can't guarantee that. But you can look yourself in the mirror and look God in the face and know you did the right thing. And now we see what's going to happen. And then after you've done that, whether they forgive you or whether they don't, you start speaking their love language over a period of 6 months and just once a week and see what happens.
Right.
And I can almost guarantee you before that 6 months is over, you're going to see them begin to melt and begin to reach out to you. So we can't change our spouse, but we can influence our spouse. And we do every single day. So let's have a positive influence rather than a negative influence.
And for those of you who are local here, if you go to connexuschurch.com/counselor, there's a list of vetted Christian counselors there that you can go to if you're wondering, hey, where do I begin? And any of our staff members could help you connect with that person. And we've spent a lot of time. This is so helpful as we're talking about, hey, how do I respond under the pressure? Because these are the pressure moments of conflict and criticism. So they're more reactive than they are proactive. And so I would love to hear from you. You've spoken to thousands of couples. What are kind of the top 2 or 3 proactive things if I am in a marriage relationship and I want to foster something healthy? What are the 2 or 3 top habits that you see, Dr. Chapman?
Well, one thing that I suggest to couples is every year share a book on marriage. Here's what I mean by share. Each of you read the same chapter and then sit down and say, what do you think we can learn from that chapter? And just work through a book every year the rest of your life. There's enough good Christian books on marriage to keep you busy the rest of your life.
Yeah, you've written most of them. You've written most of them. Yeah.
And what it's just an outside voice talking about a particular topic that both of you read, and then you say, well, what can we learn from that? So to me, that's one thing. The other thing I would say is this. Try to find and attend a marriage enrichment event once a year. It can be a weekend conference. It can be a one-day conference. It can be a class at your church that goes for 6 or 8 or 10 weeks. Or if you don't go to church, find the church that has a class like that and go to it. Where you're going to be sitting with other people, hearing some things that are very practical and helpful, and you're going to go home and talk about it. What can we learn? And my wife and I have always said, if we go to a conference on marriage and we learn one thing that we decide to do differently, it was worth going to the conference. Because marriages are either growing or they are regressing. They never stand still. But those 2 things of reading a book every year, sharing it together, and going to a marriage enrichment event every year will likely keep you on a road of personal growth. And what we want, I don't ever talk about a perfect marriage. I talk about growing marriages. We want to have a growing marriage. And those 2 things are very, very helpful in having a growing marriage.
That's great. Okay, I've got 2 last questions for you. The first one is, today, in this day and age, you walk with so many couples. I'm sure in some ways, some of the challenges are the same as they've always been, and some of them are new and fresh challenges. What would you have to say to couples today to encourage them? If a couple today is listening to this and they're in conflict, they're looking for an encouragement, what would you say to them today?
I would say if you haven't done it, choose to discover the primary love language of your spouse. You can do that reading the book. That's the best way to do it. You can also go online and take a free quiz, 5lovelanguages.com, a free quiz for married couples.
Oh, that's great.
And discover and get them to take the quiz. Each of you now know each other's primary love language, and just practice working on speaking that love language. That's the starting point, in my opinion, that has the potential of changing things quicker probably than anything else.
Okay, and then last question is, we happen to be in a series on conflict, so that's why a lot of this conversation is on conflict. Of the books you've written, a couple is struggling with conflict, what's the book that you'd recommend they kind of pick up on that topic specifically?
The title of the book is Anger, Taming a Powerful Emotion.
Right.
Because in conflicts, anger is the most common emotion that we have. So if you can learn to understand where anger comes from and learn the two kinds of anger, righteous anger and unrighteous anger, God only
Right.
has one kind.
Right.
And because some Christians think feeling anger is sinful. God gets angry every day, the Bible says, with the wicked. We're made in God's image. That's why we get angry. So I explain why we get angry. And then learning how to handle anger in a positive way. So that's the name of the book, Anger, Taming a Powerful Emotion. I think if a couple would read through that together, by the time they're through, they're probably going to learn how to process their anger in a positive way.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Chapman. Thanks for your time. Just really appreciate you investing in Connexus and our wider community today.
Well, thank you. It was good to be with you, and you keep up the good work you're doing. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.